So if we look at the symptom, the question is, why is the economy not great? And for that, and if we're going to, whenever you have a tough case, and this, believe me, is a tough case. I remember the old TV show House. He got all the tough cases. So we thought we'd bring in Dr. House to help us solve this case. Now, Dr. House, he never worked alone. He came with a team of doctors. But they're medical doctors. We thought we'd give him our own team, which are economic doctors. So the first doctor we're going to call on to help Dr. House is Dr. Robert Gordon. He wrote the book called The Rise and Fall of American Growth. Dr. Gordon believes that the issue is one of a productivity slowdown. Namely, he believes, and he calls this supply-side secular stagnation. What this means is he believes the productivity gains from information technology have played out. And he believes that it's not so much that this is an abnormal event. He believes the productivity gains we saw from technology were unusually large. So we're getting back to a more normal environment. You can see how this looks in this next chart. You see that increase in productivity, and then you see that come down. So all of us would look at this and go, but that doesn't make any sense. There's lots of new things coming in technology. The issue is, and Dr. Gordon would point out, that a lot of the latest innovations have been based on entertainment and are not productivity-based. Case in point, I would argue that Facebook is not a productivity enhancer. And this quote from Peter Thiel sort of typifies what that issue is. He said, "We wanted flying cars, but instead we got 140 characters." Next doctor we're going to call on is Dr. Larry Summers. Dr. Summers was a former Treasury Secretary in the Clinton administration. He's also presently president of Harvard. He agrees that it's secular stagnation, but he says it's demand side, not supply side. He said there's not been enough demand in the economy. Namely, all of you are not spending enough money. He believes that this leads to lower investment because if companies see people not buying, they're not going to spend on plant and equipment, and that's what's led to the lack of productivity. He believes the way to solve this is you need governments to make up the difference. You need governments to spend money, so-called fiscal policy. You can see how this plays out in this chart here. It's a survey from a Gallup survey. It shows, again, since the Great Recession, more people preferring to save than spend. Now, the next doctor we're going to call on is actually a team of doctors. It's Dr. Carmen Reinhart and Kenneth Rogoff. They're Harvard professors and wrote the book, This Time is Different. They believe the issue is one of deleveraging. They say that basically what has happened, people accumulated too much debt before the Great Recession, and we're now in a deleveraging cycle, and typically these cycles take about 8 years. They say that recoveries during these deleveraging cycles are weaker than normal, and that is why the economy is not great. You can see how this plays out in this chart that shows U.S. household debt. You can see the dotted line is the recession. You can see how debt built up before the recession and then the deleveraging, except that green arrow at the end has started to move up higher again, which means maybe that 8-year cycle is going to be a lot longer. We like this theory, and Dr. House will like this theory. We think it definitely played a role, and we definitely made the recession worse. The problem with this theory is that GDP growth was slowing well before the deleveraging cycle happened. It's likely debt increased because GDP growth slowed. So this played a role, but there's more to the story than just the deleveraging. Our last doctor that we're going to call on is Dr. Mervyn King. Dr. King is a former governor of the Bank of England and just wrote a book called The End of Alchemy. Dr. King believes the problem is one of a savings glut. Namely, he believes there's been unsustainable global trade imbalances that have been building since the 2000s. Namely, he thinks U.S. growth during this time frame has been based on consumption, whereas Asian and Europe, meaning Germany, has been based on exports. He believes that U.S. consumers financed their spending by adding debt, and he believes that countries like China used the proceeds of their exports to buy U.S. Treasury bills, which tended to lower interest rates and also resulted in lower inflation in the United States. You can see how this plays out in this chart. The chart on the left, the blue lines are showing U.S. trade deficits. The lines above the line are showing Chinese and European, mainly German, trade surpluses. On the right, you can see treasury yields and interest rates and inflation moving lower. So we think all four of these play a role, and Dr. House would agree that all four played a role in why the economy hasn't been great. However, we believe the last two. We believe the combination of the deleveraging and the trade imbalances really do go a long way to explaining why the economy hasn't been great.